Hi, I'm Jeff Golden. I'm publisher for CMC Press. That's all the guidebooks that the CMC puts out. So I'm a full-time employee as well as a trip leader, Denver Group Council member, and just all around fan of the club and all of its members and events and everything. So, as part of this COVID-19 quarantine, the CMC office is closed. We're all working from home, the same as most of you are. And as part of that, we're trying to keep people informed and engaged, even though the CMC classes and schools and trips and everything have been canceled for the foreseeable future. There's still ways we can communicate and ways that we can inform and teach and instruct. And so as part of that, we're doing a real short series of videos on virtual tips and tricks. And each staff person, I think, is going to handle something a little different. But my topic that I'm gonna take on here is what is a 14er? And the point of that is that whenever you hear somebody talk about being a 14er finisher or talking about the 14er list, you'll hear different numbers. You'll hear people say, well, there are 53 Colorados or 14ers in Colorado, or there are 54 14ers in Colorado, or there are 58 or 59 or 74. It's what number's correct? What number should you do if you're just starting out on your 14er journey and want to pick an objective and an end goal? How many should you do? How many should you count? And there isn't really a clear answer. I'm going to go over real quick the differences between those numbers and why people choose different objectives and why they argue about it incessantly. But to start, just real quick, we have to talk about what a ranked peak means. So I'm going to hold up this graphic here. So you can see the green line represents two peaks. The bigger one is definitely a mountain because it's the highest point around. It rises at least 300 feet above its connecting saddle. The one that has maybe written over it will depend if that's a mountain or not. So from that saddle, from that low point between the two peaks, it has to rise at least 300 feet. If it rises less than 300 feet, it's called an unranked mountain. If it rises at least 300 feet above that connecting saddle, it's a ranked mountain, and that's considered a 14er by pretty much everybody. So you're starting that list of 53 here. This is the baseline, this is the starting point. This is real simple. It's basically all of the 14ers in Colorado, all of the mountain summits that rise above 14,000 feet that also rise at least 300 feet above its connecting saddle from its neighboring mountains. So there are 53 named and ranked 14ers in Colorado, and that's the easiest baseline. If you want to be safe and really stick by the rules and by the book, then 53 is the number for you. You get up into the next number is 54, which is the CMC's official number, which basically takes that list of 53, drops one, so Challenger Point is kind of an outlier here. Challenger Point was not considered a 14er until recently, until within the last 2 or 3 decades. I can't remember exactly when it was resurveyed, but historically, based on the older geographical surveys, Challenger Point was considered below 14,000 feet. Its summit was 13,900 and something, and so it just wasn't considered a 14er by anybody. So that was never part of the equation. And then the CMC also adds North Maroon and El Diente. And the reason for that is there are two peaks that, even though they're not ranked, they don't rise. North Maroon does not rise 300 feet from its connecting saddle to South Maroon, and El Diente does not rise 300 feet from its connecting saddle with Mount Wilson. So even though they're not considered ranked, they're cool peaks. They're kind of just grandfathered in because anybody that's ever been to the Maroon Bells and looked up at both mountains, it's pretty clear that they're mountains, right? Who cares if the saddle, if North Maroon is less than 300 feet. So there's a few mountains that are grandfathered in that way. Challenger Point is not included on the CMC list just because historically, there are thousands of people that have reported finishing the 14ers to the CMC starting in the 1920s, and Challenger Point was never considered a 14er until recently, so it's just been continued to be left off of the main CMC list, even though it was resurveyed recently and found to be just above 14,000 feet. So to make up for that little discrepancy, there are quite a few people that consider 55 as their number. So it's basically the CMC list plus Challenger Point, or it's the list of 53, the named and unranked peaks, plus El Diente plus North Maroon. So that's a pretty safe list to go with too. There's a good argument for that one. There's honestly a good argument for all of these numbers. But I will say this next one is probably the most common. This is the one that if you walk into a room of 14er aficionados and ask how many 14ers are there, I would bet anything that the winner of that poll would be 58. This is the list that's used in most current guidebooks. It's used on 14ers.com. It's just, again, within the community, it is the most commonly used number. And it basically, again, starting with that list of 53, which includes Challenger Point, you add on 5 peaks that are named but unranked. So at some point when the U.S. Geographical Survey parties were first exploring the mountains and first naming the mountains throughout Colorado, they kind of named at will. They chose, that peak looks like a golden horn. We're going to call it golden horn, or that peak looks like whatever. They just kind of picked and chose what they named. And so there are 5 peaks that are officially named. If you look at a map, any official topo USGS map, you will see these mountains listed and named. So they're all included, even though all of them are unranked, and a few of them are pretty severely unranked. Like Mount Cameron and Mount Aeolus, they only come 150, 200 feet above their nearest connecting saddle to their bigger neighbors. So it's there's some arguing back and forth about whether those mountains should count. Honestly, they're counted. I think most people count them because they're easy to get when you're on the way to somewhere else. It's easy to get if you're doing the DeCalibron loop. If you're doing Mount Lincoln, Mount Bras, and Mount Democrat, then you have to go over Mount Cameron anyway. So you might as well count it, and you get a little extra number next to your peak list. And same thing for North Aeolus. It's like a 20-minute side trip when you're on the way to Mount Aeolus in Chicago Basin. So. Maybe that list of 58 has a little bit of ego involved there, just inflating the number a little bit. But again, it's the most common number. It's what most people use. It's what I use. I'm personally a 14er finisher, and I personally use the list of 58. 2 more numbers here. You'll see 59 is what's considered the winter list. So people that are trying to finish all the 14ers in winter, which is up to close to 20 people have done it now. There's more and more every year. But they typically include North Massive, which is, of course, connected to Mount Massive. The reason being that is that Aaron Ralston, the guy of 127 Hours fame, Between a Rock and a Hard Place, played by James Franco, he was the 3rd or 4th person to do all the winter 14ers. He did them all solo, which is just an incredible feat when you consider how much snowshoeing and trail breaking that was. But he added North Massive and thought it was a mountain and claimed it as a mountain and claimed himself a winter finisher based on the number 59. So basically the people that came after him as a tip of the cap, as a nod of the head, included 59 as well. So in order to consider yourself a true winter finisher in the same club as Aaron Ralston and Steve Gladback and some of the people that came early and kind of established winter 14er climbing as a trend, you have to use the number 59 because that's kind of the precedent that was set. There are some people that are finishing now or getting close to finishing the winter 14ers now who argue and say, well, that's kind of arbitrary. I'm going to use my list of 58 or 55 or 54 or whatever it is. And that's fine. You can consider yourself a 14er finisher even though you're not directly comparing yourself to the feat of somebody else that came before. The final number is 74, which is literally everything. That counts every little ridge bump, sub-summit, little knob on the way to bigger 14ers. If there is a point on a ridge that's above 14,000 feet, and you include that in your 14er list, then there are 74. There are very few people that pursue that list. It's kind of obscure. It's a lot of the quote unquote summits are nothing more than like a bump on a ridge somewhere. There are some that are exciting and require some significant effort and scrambling. The most technical being Sunlight Spire, which is actually requires technical crack trad climbing skills at 14,000 feet in Chicago Basin, deep in the Weminuche Wilderness. So that is definitely the most exotic that a 14er can possibly get. But in terms of what number is right for you, it's really up to each individual, up to each person. Pick and choose what makes sense to you and just stick with it. If somebody argues with you, it's a fun conversation, but they can't really take away from your accomplishment. If you do 53 peaks and consider yourself a 14er finisher, then you're a 14er finisher. I wouldn't worry about comparing yourself to others, as long as you're again, choosing a list that's exciting for you, that's fun for you, and that you believe in. Your opinion is that that's the correct list, then run with it. And the CMC keeps official summit records for everybody. Anybody that finishes the 14ers can submit their accomplishment to us and get a certificate and get added to the official record list. And we'll count everything 53 and above. So if there's somebody that thinks they're a 14er finisher at 53 and doesn't want to do the extra unnamed, what they consider sub-summits, then we still count it. It's basically if people, whatever you want to count, as long as it's above that baseline of 53, you are good to go. I hope this was a little helpful, or at least entertaining, 10 or so minutes while we're all kind of hunkered down in quarantine. I'm kind of staying sane by thinking, I had to cancel a trip to Europe. My wife and I were going to Scotland. We talked about going to Utah next month. We're having to make all these concessions, and obviously it's a bummer not to be able to go play and do these things that we want to do. But we can use this time that we're all inside down, to plan. Even if we can't play, we can plan. So, start thinking ahead about summer, fall, even next winter. It's when the ski resorts hopefully finally open again. There's plenty of time now to think about all the exciting things that are going to come once we've gotten through this pandemic. So we're going to keep these series of videos coming. This is just one of many that will be coming out over the next month or two, and we'll keep them going as long as we're working from home. So if you think of any topics that you want covered, also feel free to just email office@cmc.org, and we'll find somebody on staff that hopefully can give a good rundown. So thanks, guys. Stay safe, stay sane.